Welcome to another edition of Journey of Hope. Stories of people that have been impacted by the healing ministry of Loma University Medical Center, or people who have made an impact upon the medical center. People from around the world that travel here to be treated, seeking healing and hope and wholeness. Our special guests today are Ken and Kathleen Venturi. Ken is one of the most amazing guys I've ever met. Holds a number of different awards: PGA Player of the Year, Sports Illustrated Sportsman of the Year, member of the U.S. Ryder Cup team, captain, U.S. President's Cup team, member of the U.S. Walker team, and I could go on and on. Ken and Kathleen, it's good to have you here. We've got people from around the world that are watching, and you're no stranger to television. I think you hold the record. 35 years, if I remember right, being the longest lead sports analyst in history. Is that correct?
Still am, yeah. It's been a long time. I don't know where the time is going. Even Lynn talking about 35 years with CBS. This year, this June, I've been retired for 7 years. I don't know where the time goes. I mean, it goes too fast.
Time goes by very quickly. Well, we want to get the audience get acquainted. Many people from around the world know who you are, but let's tell the people a little bit about your background. We're going to learn about Kathleen, and then we're going to learn about your impact on Loma Linda and Loma Linda's impact on you. But tell us where you're from and where you were raised, and a little bit about your family.
Well, I was born and raised in San Francisco, and when you're giving me all these accolades, the whole thing, it brings me back a thought to my father. One night I was at the dinner table telling him how good I was. I'm the best, nobody's better than me, Dad, I'm just go on. And my dad was just nodding. And then I finally ran out of accolades, and he said to me, he said, are you finished, son? I said, yeah, Dad. He said, son, let me tell you something, and don't forget it. When you're as good as you are, you can tell everybody. But when you get really good, son, they will tell you. And I said, when I think of the nice things you have to say, but I never forgot that. And that's, you know, I was raised in an era that I wouldn't trade, and my parents were just great, and I took up golf at a young age. But the people that I met, the people I've gotten to know over the years, were a big impact on my life.
Well, we'll talk about it a little later, but you've known some very prominent, famous, what people call very famous people. And as you know, I've read some of your stories and listened to you. You know, they made an impact upon you and upon your career and upon you as a person. Well, Kathleen, tell us where you're from.
I was born in Los Angeles, raised in Pasadena, and all my life, and moved to the desert about 10 years ago.
Okay, and there's quite a remarkable story in the two of you getting acquainted. Well, you started golf at what age?
Well, I was caddying from probably 9 or 10 years old, and I got into golf, oddly enough, about 13 years old, and it's a story we'll never hardly believe, is that when I was 13 years old and thinking that I did television for 35 years, the teacher told my mother, I'm sorry, Mrs. Venturi, but your son will never be able to speak. He's an incurable stammerer.
Okay, now that's a very significant, because I've seen some of the titles given to you, and one of them was the comeback kid. So at a very early age, you had a terrible stammering problem, apparently.
Couldn't say my own name, and then, of course, stammering is probably the only handicap that people make fun of, and it was very hard to do. And golf was the loneliest sport. So I was 13 and I was caddying but didn't play. My mother said, what do you plan to do? I said, I plan to take up the loneliest sport I know, and went out to Harding Park and hit my first golf balls and the whole thing. And then I was at 18 years old, I was a pretty good athlete, and I was Lefty O'Doul, who was with the Yankees, signed me to a Yankee contract, and my tutor was Joe DiMaggio.
Oh, you gotta be kidding.
Yeah.
Way back then.
Yeah.
No kidding. So, I mean, you're stammering. So how did you ever overcome this? I mean, this is quite an impediment for a young person. I mean, you're almost socially ostracized.
Well, the things that I do, I'm on the Stuttering Foundation out there,
Oh, yeah.
and I've helped and teach kids how to speak. Things that I did when I was young, I don't know, they can't figure out how I figured out of doing this, of echoing, but what happened was we put in your hands over your ears, and there's an echo, and I had a big pot put over my head, you can hear the echo. And what happened with me with television, with the headset, I could hear myself talking, and that's what helps. and rhythm and rhyme. Like you take Mel Tillis, who was a terrible stammer, but never when he sings. He gets the rhythm going. And so there were certain things, and that was my golf swing. And as I was swinging the club, I was teaching myself to speak.
That is an amazing story. So that was one of the first things you overcame. Well, at a very young age, you were involved in a remarkable tournament. Why don't you tell us about that? And I'm talking about still as an amateur.
Oh, that was well, of course, I was introduced to, I saw Byron Nelson when I was about 13, win the San Francisco Open. Never known I was ever going to meet him, and came home and told my mother I saw the greatest golfer in the world. I want to grow up to be just like him, never known that I would meet him. And the thing about it is that I was introduced to him in 1952. And I was in the service for a couple of years.
He's one of the most famous golfers of ever.
Oh, his winning streak, 18 in 1 year, 11 in a row, and everything like that. And he gave me all his knowledge. I'm very knowledgeable in the game because I was taught by Byron Nelson. And then, of course, the one that was where I, as an amateur, I still am the lowest amateur ever in the history of the Masters, almost won it in '56. And I turned pro. I turned pro because of a writer in San Francisco that took words out of context that I had said when I got back. And the next year I went to Augusta. Oddly enough, I was booed for what they believed I had said. And I'll never forgive the writer for not mentioning his name. And it took years, but I told my dad says, don't try to explain, let your clubs do the talking, and they will someday understand. And those who were critical of me became my closest and loyal friends because they were so embarrassed that they believed what this writer had said.
People are so quick to jump to conclusions.
Oh, yes, so true.
So tell me this match. This apparently is what this book is about. The match.
Oh, that was in January of '56.
Okay.
I was just talking about the Masters in April of '56, but this was a match that a book that Mark Frost did, and it's a true story. And as I said, it'd be very difficult to tell you about the book because it'd be like giving you the ending to a Hitchcock movie because you can't do it.
You can't do it.
It's fictional. It is. If it wasn't true, you'd throw it out. But it was like it happened at. We were at George Coleman's house at Pebble Beach. Bing Crosby was there, Bob Hope, and a bunch of over there, Dean Martin, and Harvey Ward and I, who I consider Harvey one of the greatest amateurs to ever play the game. They said, "What are you going to do tomorrow?" I said, "We're going to play a little golf, the whole thing." And they said, "Do you have a game?" He says, "No." He said, "Would you like a game?" He said, "Well, sure, it'd be fine." He said, "Who would you like to play?" And Harvey and I looked at each other, and I said, "Those two guys over there, those two guys happen to be Ben Hogan and Byron Nelson."
Oh, you got to be kidding.
And George Coleman, who was the big investor of the Hogan Company, asked Ben, he said, "I'd like you to do me a favor. The two kids want to play you." And he couldn't say no. And Eddie Lowry, who was matched with Byron in the Crosby at those times, said the two kids would like to play with you. And of course, Byron, knowing me since '52, he said fine. And I don't ever remember Hogan and Nelson playing a practice round together, the whole thing.
Really?
They were competitors, and so we played, and we met at at Cypress Point, and the great line of which you can't even show, but I can show you because I'm on the air. Is that they said the two kids want to play you, and they both said fine. So Ben Hogan had a starting time at Pebble Beach at 11 o'clock. And Hogan and I got to be very close in '54 when I was in the service in the Korean War. I was invited to play with him in the Masters.
Oh, were you really?
And so we became very good friends. And so he said, "We'll play tomorrow at Cypress at 10 o'clock. And George Coleman said, "Well, I'll cancel your starting time at Pebble Beach." And Ben goes, "No, don't cancel the starting time. I don't want let them think I'm playing it at Pebble Beach." And as he walks by me, just like I am with you, he said, I don't want anybody coming out and watching me play against two amateurs. And he looks over at me and he goes, and I go, you got it. And I just, and what, to me, we were in great awe. But the story, it's so, to me, it's the greatest golf book ever written.
And this has just really been produced here and just been published recently.
Just a couple years, I guess.
Yeah,
2 years.
2 years. National bestseller, The Match, The Day the Game of Golf Changed Forever. Well, you have been good for golf. Golf's been good for you. Let's bring it into Loma Linda now. Tell us when you first got acquainted with Dr. James Slater.
I got acquainted with him when my mother was dying of cancer, and he looked after her and never charged a penny. We didn't have any money and stuff. And
Where were you living at this time?
Palm Springs
In
at
Palm
that
Springs,
time.
okay.
She died in January of 1953, and we'd known, you know, he had met and looked at there, and he knew of me about the amateur and stuff, and she died in January of 53, and
73, wasn't it?
I mean 73.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
73.
And so I said, "How can I ever repay you?" He said, "Someday I may ask you a favor, you know." And I said, "You have it." And that's when I got involved in the Loma Linda tournament.
So this was back in the mid-70s when your mother had been treated and taken care of Dr. James Slater. And of course, Dr. Slater had a real vision and a burden for treating patients and was very frustrated. Sometimes the treatment, you know, the cure was worse than the problem itself. Yeah. And that's what led him to bring this group of people from around the world. And, you know, he apparently didn't forget that you had said, if I can ever be of any help, let me know. So years later, the Proton Center was developed, and then he asked you to be a sponsor for the Ken Venturi tournament. It's been going on for, we're coming up on 20 years
20
now.
years, yes.
20 years. And the money from that's raised during this tournament has established a Ken Venturi chair, and I think we're getting close to $3 million in that chair. And we just really, we want to thank you. And you know, you were telling people over and over about Loma Linda and one thing or another. And then a few years ago, you got the sobering news that you were diagnosed with cancer. And so you slipped over here to Loma Linda, didn't have a question on what you were going to do. And I think you were still involved in broadcasting at that time.
Oh, yes.
They had a lot of things going on. So right at first, it wasn't widely known that you had been treated for prostate cancer. But you were treated here. And every year, and this would be my 10th year, I think. For the last 10 years, I've been going. I wish I could tell you that I've put everything into practice that we've talked about. But it's a thrilling time to see these people coming from all across the country, coming together to get in on the golf clinic and then to participate. So things are going fine. And I think it was about the same time that you'd been diagnosed, and somehow Kathleen comes into the picture.
I'll tell you a great story that's about that, is that if I had to choose to be anybody in the world, I'd choose to be me. The only thing I ever question is I wonder what I could have done if I didn't lose the use of my hands. And that got me into broadcasting. I was hired in 1968 because my hands were gone.
And that was because of an accident in this carpal?
Well, carpal tunnel and Dubitron contractures and everything like that. And so the thing about it is that Jack Whitaker, great announcer, said the one time when he introduced me at the Waldorf Astoria, and I live by this statement. He said, because of my career being short and everything, he said, but fate has a way of bending the twig and fashion a man to his better instincts. And let me tell you about prostate cancer. If I didn't have prostate cancer, what they wanted to operate on me in Florida, I said, I know where I'm going. I'm going to Loma Linda. And if it wasn't for that, fate does have a way of bending the twig. Yeah. I never would have had my Kathleen.
So you got the prostate cancer, and now tell us what happened. I mean, it was about the same time you had been diagnosed and finally ended up coming down here. Where did you meet Kathleen?
Well, I lost my wife years before that, and I was never looking, and it was on a Friday night, and this friend of mine wanted to take me to the restaurant, and you know, and I said, no, I don't feel like it tonight, the whole thing. He said, well, you got to do me a favor, we'll go in. I said, okay, because I didn't get treatments on Saturday and Sunday,
Right.
only on the weekdays.
So you had the weekend off.
And I walked in, and this person was behind the desk, and she was helping out her friend who owned the restaurant, and about ready to leave. And I walked in, and I took a look over at this lady, and I used one of the great lines from a movie. I went, hoo-ah.
Hoo-ah.
And that's the first time I laid eyes on Kathleen, and we went out to lunch on Saturday and on Sunday, and I had gone through 3 treatments. I had gone through Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and I'd come back and stay with this friend of mine, and I'd hit golf balls and play. And on Sunday, she didn't know golf or what it was with me. And
I wasn't a golfer.
into there. And she asked me what I was doing in town, and I just decided to tell her. And she said, would you like some company tomorrow?
Because you were driving back and forth, the long trip.
An
And
hour,
I-
hour each way.
Hour up
way.
and hour back, and I said, sure. So she rode with me the next day to Loma Linda and proceeded to ride with me for the next 35 treatments.
And one thing, you know,
Yeah.
wonderful. What you're saying is a traumatic event in your life. You're diagnosed with cancer, but because of that, and not because of that, but during that situation, you met the love of your life, and ended up getting married. And you know, many people end up encountering some kind of an injury or an illness, and you know, it's the end for them.
No.
Other people, you know, people like you are not only survivors, but you're thrivers. You go on and you make the best of thing. And we have people looking right now that have just been encountering some kind of a difficulty. And what would you tell them?
I would tell them a quote from my father again: adversity is the fork in the road. If you accept it, you get worse. If you don't accept it, you get better.
And you've been one of those that have followed that counsel, because you are an overcomer. Now, a couple of years ago, I know that there has been some information released to the news here, but a couple of years ago, you had, again, kind of a little problem with your heart. How did this affect you, Kathleen?
Oh, well.
It was a frightening time.
Very frightening, it was. He had complained of pains that morning, and I said, well, let's get you over to the emergency and have him take a look at you. And I called the doctor, and he said, good idea. And so we went over there, and sure enough, he'd had a slight heart attack during the night. And so they said, they did some tests on him, and they said, you know, it's necessary. We're going to have to do a 5-way bypass. And I'm going, oh, Lord, a 5-way bypass, you know. But with our faith and everything, he came through with flying colors. And he, today, which is now 3 years.
Almost 3 years
almost
later.
3 years, 0 medication.
He is a remarkable, amazing.
But the most amazing thing, Lynn, is that I don't know how can you have an attack on something you don't have.
All heart, all heart. Well, we got a couple pictures. Let's look at the pictures. You kind of talk to them.
That's Dr. Slater.
Dr. Slater.
Who probably was the man who invented the...
Yeah, he's the one that started the whole thing, brought it into a clinical setting. And this is?
That was the U.S. Open when I made the final putt on the last hole, and it was totally a miracle. And it was something that it was the last year they played 36 holes, and it was a day I'll never forget.
Well, an amazing time. And here you are, 35 years.
Yeah, it's good. There it is. There's my coat and tie, which I wore every Sunday, every Saturday and Sunday.
That's a great picture.
But that's what I told you about the headphones, that I could hear myself speaking, which
Kind of
I still, if they say, you know, did you used to be a stammerer? I say, no, I am, because you always never get out of that. And the kids that I help, I'm just proud of it.
Well, you need to be proud of it. This is one of the golf clinics that you conduct here.
That is when at Morningside and showing them that when you get the ball too far away from you, you're bending over, and then you straighten up and you hit the ball from the inside, and that's the clinics I give there.
And I need to remember those tips. All right, and here you have
John Cook, who helps us out in the years, and I took John Cook under my wing when he was 14 years old at Mission Hills, and he's done great, and I'm very proud of him. And there's the Slaters.
That's both Dr. Jim and Dr. Jerry Slater.
Jerry. And that's,
tell us what this is.
that is the trophy of the President's Cup, which I was captain of in 2000 and won by the biggest margin in international play. And I was very proud to be asked to be captain and to be victorious.
Well, and it is one of the most significant, I understand even today, the largest margin. And you were the captain of that.
And
this is the
dedication
of the James Slater building, you know, proton treatment there.
And they ask, I know that you said a few nice words about both about the center and about Dr. Slater, and I think you gave him a golf club, and he really didn't know what to do with it.
No,
You're right.
He is probably one of my greatest pupils because he's never missed a shot.
Never missed a shot. All right. Okay, now tell us what this is, because this is very significant.
Let Kathleen tell you this.
Tell us all about it.
Well, we were very fortunate. We were in Texas, and Ken received the Byron Nelson Achievement Award, I believe it's called.
Yes.
And in doing so, they wanted to donate to one of our charities. And Ken says, well, he says, I have a lot of charities. And they said, well, would you pick one? And he says, well, he says, I'm very fond of Loma Linda, and my wife is on the board of the auxiliary at Loma Linda for Children's Hospital. And he says, I would very much like to have that as our charity. And in turn, they said, well, we're going to give you a check for $100,000.
$100,000.
And we just kind of looked at each other and went,
When I gave it to her, she almost passed out. But Boone Pickens was there, who presented the check, and
right.
And I said, because she's on the board, and we were able to present that to the hospital, and very proud of it.
Well, what a wonderful gesture you did. Now, we got a couple of books here. Tell us very quickly what this book is.
It's called Getting Up and Down, My 60 Years in Golf. It's my life story, and they are still trying. It's on the borderline of making a movie of the book, and people that have known me all my life didn't realize the things that I were in that book about my life, because, you know, it's that, as I told you, my dad, that when you're really good, they'll tell you. And the thing about it, I take a page of why I do the Loma Linda and the things like that, is I asked Byron Nelson, how could I ever repay you for all you've done for me? He said, Ken, be good to the game and always give back. And I took a page from Byron Nelson.
Well, and that's what it is an amazing story, insights and lessons in life that you revealed during that time.
Yeah.
And this last book is the one that we were just talking about, The Match. Well, why don't you tell me and tell the audience here, you know, about this matter of giving back, because you have been giving back in so many different ways, and you've chosen a number of different charities, but we're so thankful that you're a friend here of Loma Linda and for what you've been doing with the with the tournament. But tell the audience what it means to give back.
Well, it's just, and I've always remembered that the statement that the world will never remember you for what you take from it, only what you leave behind. And I have a great statement as I made many years ago. I used this. I was the chairman of the Special Olympics in Florida. And I was there, and they were doing the 100-yard dash. And these two boys are getting ready to cross the finish line.
In the Special Olympics.
Special Olympics. And they looked back, and their friend had fallen down. They both stopped and went back and picked up their friend and carried him across the finish line. And I learned then one thing in life: never look so far ahead that you don't look back to see who you can help.
Oh, what a powerful saying. You know, I saw a couple of things here that I think he had a couple of outstanding, if I can put my finger on it, I don't think I'm going to be able to spot it here, of different quotes that you had been attributed to you over the years. Here's one of them. In every decision I've considered in my life, the determining question I would ask myself was, would my mother and father be proud? A second one, everybody has a hole or a type of hole that just doesn't jibe with their imagination. The key is to make it fit your eye, even if it means hitting an iron off the tee and then a fairway wood to the green. Never fight your eye. The hole will win every time.
There's, in fact, when you take that, I can tell you what, there wouldn't be many mistakes if every kid would go on, because they know right from wrong, would every decision I made as a young man, would my mother and father be proud of me? And every decision I made in golf, would Byron Nelson and Ben Hogan be proud of me? And I don't say that perfect, but I haven't made many mistakes because I don't think they would either.
Those are some of the kind of things that motivated you and guided you throughout life. Well, Ken, you have been an inspiration to so many of us here at the hospital and a role model, and you and Kathleen have been a tremendous inspiration. We want to thank you for joining us here on Journey of Hope. For those in the listening audience or watching on, this is, again, an amazing individual that's been impacted by Loma Linda. He and his wife have made a tremendous impact upon Loma Linda University and the Medical Center with the Ken Venturi Chair, which is an academic chair sponsoring research. For those of you that are looking on, I am Lynn Martell with Journey of Hope. Our special guests have been Ken and Kathleen Venturi. Thank you for joining us. And always look up. God has a plan for your life. Give him a chance. Thank you so much for being with us. See you next week.